Why does a case that is now really more than 36 years old matter?
Because somebody died, and no matter what, ultimately that's our job, to find the truth.
When you talk to us, everything fit. Makes more sense of what happened and is corroborated by other people.
On a dark, rain-swept night off California's Catalina Island in November 1981, 3 Hollywood figures boarded a 60-foot yacht named the Splendor. Movie star Natalie Wood, her husband Robert Wagner, and her rising co-star Christopher Walken.
I've always been terrified, still am, of water, dark water, seawater.
At the time of the incident, her death was ruled an accident.
She got in the water somehow, and I don't think she got in the water by herself.
By morning, Natalie Wood was gone, her body floating off the coastline in a red down jacket. For so many years, one quiet eyewitness account held the story together, directly from Christopher Walken, about what really went down on that boat. The night on the Splendor and what Walken spills. The fateful weekend began quietly enough as Thanksgiving wrapped up in late November 1981. Natalie Wood, a timeless Hollywood icon, and her husband, polished screen actor Robert Wagner, decided to take their 60-foot luxury yacht, the Splendor, out for a weekend getaway off Santa Catalina Island. Joining them for the trip was 38-year-old Christopher Walken, Wood's intensely charismatic co-star on the sci-fi thriller Brainstorm, which they had been filming in North Carolina. At the helm of the vessel was Dennis Davern, the couple's trusted full-time boat captain. What was supposed to be a relaxing coastal retreat rapidly transformed into one of the most enduring, tragic mysteries in entertainment history, anchoring a dark cloud over American pop culture that persists to this day. On the evening of Saturday, November 28th, the group tied up the yacht at Isthmus Cove and headed ashore to Doug's Harbor Reef restaurant for dinner and heavy drinking. Witnesses at the restaurant recalled the party being lively, but as the alcohol flowed, palpable tension began to simmer beneath the surface. Sometime around 10 p.m., the group returned to the yacht by dinghy. Once back on board, the atmosphere inside the small main cabin deteriorated rapidly into a fierce argument. According to initial statements, the disagreement centered around career choices, personal philosophies, and the level of emotional involvement between actors on set. At one point in the evening, the conflict escalated to the point where Robert Wagner smashed a wine bottle against the salon table in a fit of anger. Not long after the violent outburst, the cabin went quiet. Natalie Wood excused herself to go to bed in the master stateroom, visibly upset by the chaotic argument. That was the last time anyone aboard saw her alive. Hours later, after midnight, Wagner noticed his wife was missing from the cabin. Upon inspecting the deck, the crew discovered that the yacht's small rubber dinghy, named the Valiant, was also gone from its tether. Initial assumptions were that Natalie had taken the dinghy ashore on her own to escape the tense boat, or perhaps to head back to the island. However, as the hours ticked away in the pitch-black darkness and search flares went unanswered, desperation mounted. A distress signal was finally raised, initiating a massive search and rescue operation along the jagged Catalina coastline. Just before 8 a.m. on Sunday, November 29th, search teams made a horrific discovery. Natalie Wood's body was found floating face down in the water, roughly a mile away from the Splendor, wearing a nightgown, a thick flannel shirt, and a heavy red down jacket, with the empty dinghy washed up nearby. In the chaotic aftermath of the tragedy, local authorities quickly launched an inquiry to determine how an experienced swimmer and superstar could end up dead in the ocean. This is where Christopher Walken's account became the central anchor of the initial police record. Cooperative, quiet, and deeply shaken by the loss of his friend and co-star, Walken provided police with a detailed, straightforward description of what he experienced that night. Walken confirmed that a heated debate had taken place in the salon, but maintained that the argument was strictly professional and had ended before anyone turned in for the night. He stated that he retired to his guest cabin shortly after Natalie went to her room, exhausted from the trip and the long evening. Walken told investigators he never saw Natalie leave the cabin, nor did he hear any splash, cries for help, or the boat's dinghy motor starting up over the heavy pounding of the rain and crashing ocean waves. In the years following the event, Walken's rare public statements consistently reaffirmed his core belief about what happened. In a notable interview years later, Walken explained his firm conviction that the death was a catastrophic freak accident. He theorized that Natalie, disturbed by the rubber dinghy repeatedly banging against the hull of the yacht due to the rough water, went out on the slippery deck late at night to tighten its ropes. Lacking proper footing in her heavy, waterlogged clothing and wearing smooth slippers, she likely lost her footing on the slick fiberglass deck, slipped, hit her head on the side of the boat, and tumbled into the freezing water. He stressed that once submerged, her heavy down jacket would have acted like an anchor, weighing her down and making it impossible for her to climb into the rubber dinghy or swim back to the vessel. Walken's account offered a logical, tragic narrative that aligned with the original coroner's ruling of an accidental drowning, effectively closing the official book on the mystery for nearly 3 decades. How did an open-and-shut accidental drowning case suddenly turn into an active homicide investigation decades later? Reopening the investigation, old secrets and new testimony. For nearly 30 years, the official narrative surrounding Natalie Wood's death rested entirely on the initial 1981 Sheriff's Department report. The case was formally closed as a tragic accidental drowning caused by a midnight slip on a rain-slicked deck. But in November 2011, just weeks before the 30th anniversary of the tragedy, the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department stunned Hollywood by announcing that the investigation into Natalie Wood's death was officially being reopened. The trigger was not new physical evidence dredged from the ocean floor, but rather a sudden, dramatic shift in testimony from the one man who had been at the helm of the vessel that night, boat captain Dennis Davern. Davern came forward to publicly admit that he had deliberately lied to homicide investigators back in 1981 during the original inquiry. He confessed that out of fear, loyalty, and heavy pressure from Robert Wagner's legal and publicity team, he had omitted crucial details about what truly transpired on the Splendor during those final hours. In new, detailed statements to law enforcement and media outlets, Davern painted a far darker, more chaotic picture of the atmosphere aboard the yacht. He revealed that the argument between Wagner and Wood was not merely a brief intellectual debate over careers as initially claimed, but an explosive, alcohol-fueled confrontation that turned violent inside the cabin. Davern recalled hearing loud shouting, screaming, and the smashing of a wine bottle against the table, followed by a dramatic silence that hung over the vessel. According to Davern's updated account, the confrontation was not confined to the indoor salon. He claimed that the fight spilled out onto the rear deck of the yacht shortly before Wood disappeared. Davern stated that he personally heard Wagner shouting fiercely at his wife near the stern. When the captain attempted to step in to defuse the escalating situation, he claimed Wagner told him to stay out of it and mind his own business. Shortly after the shouting stopped, Davern realized Natalie was nowhere to be found. Most damning of all, Davern alleged that when he discovered Wood was missing and suggested immediately turning on the boat's searchlights and notifying the Coast Guard, Wagner refused. The captain claimed Wagner insisted on waiting, attempting to downplay the urgency and holding off on calling emergency services for several hours while they searched the dark boat themselves. These explosive revelations forced homicide detectives to reevaluate every single detail of the original case file. Detectives interviewed dozens of new witnesses, re-examined the initial physical evidence, and brought in top forensic pathologists to review the original autopsy reports. The findings of this re-examination were groundbreaking. In 2012, the Los Angeles County Chief Medical Examiner officially issued a revised autopsy addendum that altered the core finding of the case. Natalie Wood's cause of death was officially changed from accidental drowning to drowning and other undetermined factors. The updated medical report highlighted that several fresh bruises, abrasions, and marks on Wood's body, specifically on her arms, wrists, shoulder, and face, appeared to have occurred before she entered the water, rather than being sustained during a fall or after her death, as previously assumed. The revised coroner's report explicitly stated that the location and nature of these traumatic injuries suggested Wood may have been assaulted prior to ending up in the ocean. Forensic experts noted that the bruises on her arms looked consistent with someone being violently grabbed or struck, raising serious questions about whether a physical struggle took place on the deck before she vanished. Furthermore, oceanographic experts questioned the mechanics of the original dinghy theory, pointing out that an individual terrified of deep water, a well-documented lifelong phobia of Wood's, would be extremely unlikely to voluntarily untether a rubber dinghy in pitch-black, choppy ocean waters in the middle of a storm while wearing a heavy down jacket. The newly exposed discrepancies between the physical injuries, the captain's confession, and the delayed emergency response effectively shattered the 30-year-old consensus that the tragedy was merely a freak accident, setting off a new wave of legal scrutiny that pointed straight toward the people left on board. Where does the case stand today, and what does the law actually say about what happened that night? Current legal status and unanswered questions. The reopening of the investigation and the dramatic update to Natalie Wood's death certificate ushered in a complex, agonizing legal reality for everyone involved. By formally reclassifying her death as drowning and other undetermined factors, law enforcement officially stripped away the protective barrier of the original accidental finding. This legal shift meant that homicide detectives were no longer bound by a closed case file. The door was wide open to investigate her death as a potential crime, with no statute of limitations applying to a potential killing charge. The mystery went from a historical Hollywood tragedy to an active cold case homicide file sitting on the desks of the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. The legal pressure reached a fever pitch in February 2018 when investigators took a massive public step forward. The LA County Sheriff's Department officially designated Robert Wagner as a person of interest in the death of his wife. Detectives publicly stated that based on the updated timeline, the captain's new testimony, and the forensic reevaluation of Wood's injuries, Wagner was the last known person to be with Natalie before she vanished into the Pacific Ocean. Homicide detectives pointed out persistent inconsistencies in Wagner's statements over the decades, particularly regarding the exact timeline of events when the argument ended, and why nearly 4 hours elapsed between Natalie's disappearance and the first call to the Coast Guard. Despite repeated requests from law enforcement to sit down for a formal, recorded interview with cold case detectives, Wagner, through his legal team, consistently declined to be re-interviewed, maintaining that he had already answered every question fully back in 1981. In stark contrast to Wagner's fraught legal posture, Christopher Walken's legal standing in the investigation has remained completely clear and undisturbed. Law enforcement officials have repeatedly and explicitly stated that Walken is not, and has never been, a suspect or a person of interest in the death of Natalie Wood. From the moment the sirens sounded on the morning of November 29, 1981, Walken cooperated fully with every request made by law enforcement. He provided detailed, consistent statements, allowed investigators to review his personal timeline without hesitation, and retained prominent legal counsel who facilitated open communication with the Sheriff's Department. Detectives have publicly confirmed that Walken's account of retiring to his cabin before the final confrontation occurred has consistently held up under scrutiny, effectively placing him clear of any physical involvement in the events that took place on the deck. Yet, despite decades of intense investigation, media frenzy, and forensic reviews, the case remains locked in a frustrating state of legal limbo. In early 2022, senior homicide detectives acknowledged that while Wagner remains a person of interest, the department had exhausted nearly all available leads without securing the definitive, smoking gun evidence required to bring formal criminal charges before a grand jury. The physical limitations of a crime scene that existed decades ago on a moving vessel in the open ocean present an immense evidentiary hurdle. Crucial physical evidence was either never collected during the rushed 1981 investigation or has degraded over time, and several key figures from that era have passed away, leaving investigators dependent almost entirely on circumstantial evidence, conflicting memory recollections, and old logbooks. This leaves Natalie Wood's death as one of the most agonizing, unresolved files in Hollywood history. Legally, the case remains officially open, ensuring that if any new witness comes forward or new forensic technology yields fresh insights, the state can act immediately. But practically, without a direct confession or unprecedented physical proof, the truth remains trapped in the cold ocean waters off Santa Catalina Island. To understand how these three lives collided on that boat, you have to look at the project that brought them together in the first place. To truly grasp how these three lives collided on that fateful night, you have to look at the project that originally brought them into the same orbit. The 1983 science fiction thriller Brainstorm. Dynamics on and off set: Walken, Wood, and Wagner. Filmed throughout late 1981, the production was an ambitious, high-concept project directed by visual effects pioneer Douglas Trumbull. The plot revolved around brilliant scientists who invent a revolutionary device capable of recording and playing back human brainwaves, thoughts, and visceral physical sensations. Christopher Walken and Natalie Wood were cast as the central leads, playing estranged scientist spouses who find themselves reconnecting both professionally and personally while developing this groundbreaking technology. The dynamic between Walken and Wood on set was electric from the start. Walken, known for his unconventional intensity, distinct cadence, and deep dedication to character study, formed an immediate warm friendship with Wood. For Natalie, working alongside a wildly talented, theater-trained actor like Walken provided a fresh spark of artistic energy during a period when she was eagerly seeking mature, challenging cinematic roles. Witnesses and production crew members on the North Carolina set consistently noted how closely the two co-stars bonded off-camera. They shared frequent dinners, ran lines together endlessly, and developed an easygoing, playful camaraderie that translated into genuine, palpable chemistry on screen. This comfortable rapport between the two co-stars did not go unnoticed by Wood's husband, Robert Wagner. Wagner, a classic Hollywood leading man used to the spotlight and traditional studio glamour, was a frequent presence on the Brainstorm set. While Wagner officially maintained that he fully supported his wife's career endeavors, onlookers often detected a quiet underlying tension whenever he visited the set. Gossip columns and Hollywood insiders at the time began quietly whispering about potential jealousy, questioning whether Wagner felt uneasy about the amount of time Wood was spending with her captivating new leading man. This subtle, simmering friction was precisely what set the stage for Wagner to invite Walken out for what was intended to be a relaxed, friendly Thanksgiving weekend trip aboard their yacht, the Splendor. When Natalie Wood tragically drowned over that holiday weekend with the film nearly completed, the Brainstorm production was instantly plunged into deep crisis and emotional shock. Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, the studio backing the movie, initially reacted by attempting to shut down the production completely, filing a massive insurance claim on the grounds that the film could not be finished without its leading lady. However, director Douglas Trumbull fought tirelessly against the studio executives to save the project. Trumbull reworked the remaining script, utilized creative camera angles, employed body doubles for Wood's unfilmed scenes, and relied heavily on Walken to carry the emotional weight of the revised narrative. For Christopher Walken, the process of returning to set to shoot additional footage and complete dialogue looping alongside a stand-in was a deeply painful, surreal experience. He had to act opposite the memory of a friend whose mysterious death he had witnessed the immediate aftermath of just weeks prior. Despite the dark cloud hanging over the production, Brainstorm was eventually released in theaters in late 1983. Dedicated in memory of Natalie Wood, the film served as a bittersweet final showcase of her immense talent and a permanent cinematic snapshot of the creative bond she shared with Walken right before everything fell apart. Walken was able to build a second act, but navigating the aftermath of the Splendor disaster required an extraordinary level of personal discipline and professional focus. Life after tragedy, Christopher Walken's path forward. In the immediate wake of Natalie Wood's death, as the media descended into a frenzy of speculation and sensationalized headlines, Christopher Walken made a deliberate choice that would define his public persona for the rest of his life: total silence. Rather than giving emotional sit-down television interviews or attempting to cash in on book deals, Walken retreated into his work. He established a strict personal rule against publicly discussing the details of that night, recognizing early on that any offhand remark would only feed the endless news cycle and drag out the pain for everyone involved. Instead of letting the tragedy consume his artistic identity, Walken poured his energy back into his craft, embarking on one of the most remarkable and versatile runs in modern film history. Throughout the 80s and 90s, he systematically dismantled any attempt by Hollywood to box him into a single type of role. He delivered chilling, haunting performances in psychological thrillers like Stephen King's The Dead Zone, and brought unforgettable villainy to the James Bond franchise as Max Zorin in A View to a Kill. At the same time, his unique speech patterns, deadpan comedic timing, and theatrical flair made him an absolute scene stealer in cultural touchstones like Quentin Tarantino's Pulp Fiction, where his iconic monologue regarding a smuggled pocket watch remains one of cinema's most famous single-scene performances. As the years rolled on, Walken reinvented himself yet again, transforming from a brooding dramatic presence into a beloved pop culture icon. He showcased his incredible versatility by tap dancing through hotel lobbies in Spike Jonze's award-winning music video for Fatboy Slim's Weapon of Choice, hosting unforgettable episodes of Saturday Night Live, and earning another Academy Award nomination for his heartbreaking portrayal of Frank Abagnale Sr. opposite Leonardo DiCaprio in Catch Me If You Can. Directors continuously sought him out, not for the tabloid shadows of his past, but for his singular ability to elevate any script simply by stepping into the frame. Underpinning this extraordinary artistic career was an unusually quiet, stable private life, a stark contrast to the high-stakes drama and romantic volatility that often plagued Golden Age Hollywood royalty. Walken met his wife, former casting director Georgianne Walken, back in 1966 while touring with a production of West Side Story. The couple married in 1969 and built a notoriously low-key, grounded life away from the Los Angeles spotlight, dividing their time between quiet homes in Connecticut and New York. By choosing not to have children and maintaining a fiercely guarded private sanctuary, Walken created a solid foundation that allowed his marriage to withstand decades of intense public scrutiny, rumors, and reopened police inquiries. Over 40 years after that dark night in 1981, Christopher Walken stands as a rare Hollywood survivor, an actor whose formidable body of work eventually eclipsed the tragic shadow that once threatened to swallow his legacy. He managed to move forward without ever diminishing the gravity of what happened, maintaining a quiet dignity that few in his position could have preserved. Walken was able to build a second act, but to fully grasp what was lost that night on the water, we have to go back to the beginning of Natalie Wood's extraordinary life. A Star is Born, Natalie Wood's early life and stardom. Long before she was a household name anchoring blockbuster films, she was Natalia Nikolaevna Zakharenko, born in San Francisco in 1938 to Russian immigrant parents. Her mother, Maria, was a woman driven by intense personal ambition and a deeply ingrained belief in dark superstitions. Legend has it that a fortune teller once warned Maria that her daughter would be a great star, but also warned her to beware of dark water, a chilling premonition that would haunt the family for generations. From the moment young Natalia could walk, her mother groomed her relentlessly for a life in front of the camera, steering her toward local talent competitions and movie sets. Her big break arrived at the astonishingly young age of 4, when she landed a small, non-speaking role in the 1943 film Happy Land. Her natural poise and striking dark eyes instantly caught the attention of studio executives, leading her family to relocate to Los Angeles and officially change her name to Natalie Wood. By age 9, she achieved immortal child stardom status playing Susan Walker, the skeptical little girl who comes to believe in Santa Claus in the 1947 holiday classic Miracle on 34th Street. Unlike many child actors of her era, whose appeal faded as they grew, Natalie possessed a quiet, emotional depth on screen that made her performance hit far beyond her years. She was a major studio asset, earning thousands of dollars a week while still doing homework between takes in movie trailers. Yet, behind the glittering studio lights, Natalie's childhood was anything but a fairy tale. Her home life was strictly governed by her commanding mother, who managed every aspect of her schedule, her friendships, and her finances. She was pushed through grueling film shoots without the normal freedoms of growing up, developing a deep-seated anxiety about isolation and losing her agency. More than anything, her mother routinely used her own irrational fear of dark, deep water to keep Natalie dependent, instilling a lifelong aquatic phobia that was so intense Natalie refused to submerge her head in a swimming pool or step onto a boat without feeling immense panic. As she navigated her turbulent teenage years, Natalie faced the hardest transition any Hollywood prodigy can endure, breaking free from the child star mold to become a respected adult leading lady. The Golden Age studio system was notoriously unforgiving to young women, often attempting to typecast them or control their personal lives through strict contracts. But Natalie possessed a fierce intelligence and a quiet, rebellious streak. She fought hard to shed her polished, innocent child persona, actively pursuing complex, gritty roles that reflected the changing mood of mid-century American cinema. It wasn't long before she proved she wasn't just a child prodigy, but one of the most powerful dramatic actresses of her generation. Icons of the screen, Natalie Wood's legendary roles. Natalie Wood's transition into adult stardom was cemented in 1955 with Nicholas Ray's groundbreaking cultural touchstone, Rebel Without a Cause. Playing Judy opposite James Dean, Wood delivered a raw, vulnerable performance that perfectly captured the disaffected angst, confusion, and desperate search for identity defining 50s youth culture. At just 17 years old, she earned her first Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actress, officially breaking free from her studio-enforced child image and establishing herself as a serious dramatic force. The early 60s represented the absolute zenith of Wood's artistic and commercial power. In 1961, she took on two of the most iconic roles in cinematic history back-to-back. First came Elia Kazan's emotional powerhouse, Splendor in the Grass, where Wood played Wilma Dean Loomis, a young woman unraveling under the suffocating weight of repression and heartbreak in 1920s Kansas. Her uninhibited portrayal earned her a second Oscar nomination, this time for Best Actress. That same year, she starred as Maria in Jerome Robbins and Robert Wise's big-screen adaptation of West Side Story. The film swept the Academy Awards, became a massive global sensation, and immortalized Wood's image in American popular culture. She kept that incredible momentum going into 1962 and 1963. Wood starred in the musical adaptation Gypsy, playing the title role of burlesque legend Gypsy Rose Lee, demonstrating a razor-sharp comedic timing and magnetic stage presence. Immediately following that, she delivered a remarkably progressive, grounded performance in Love with the Proper Stranger opposite Steve McQueen. Playing an unmarried, working-class Italian-American woman facing an unintended pregnancy in New York City, Wood tackled taboo themes with quiet dignity and strength, earning her third Academy Award nomination before she had even turned 25 years old. A rare feat shared by only a tiny hand-picked group of elite performers in Hollywood history. What set Natalie Wood apart from her contemporaries was her unique ability to bridge two distinct eras of filmmaking. She began as a product of the rigid Golden Age studio system under Warner Brothers, but as cinema evolved into the gritty, auteur-driven New Hollywood movement of the late 60s and 70s, Wood evolved alongside it. She actively sought out roles that challenged traditional social norms. In 1969, she starred in Paul Mazursky's counterculture comedy Bob and Carol and Ted and Alice, a sharp film exploring sexual liberation and open relationships. The film was a massive box office hit and proved that Wood was not content to rest on her classic Hollywood legacy. She was continuously pushing boundaries and redefining what a modern leading lady could look like on screen. As the 70s progressed, Wood made a conscious choice to step back from the exhausting grind of feature films to focus on raising her two daughters, Natasha and Courtney. Yet, whenever she returned to acting, particularly in television productions like the 1979 miniseries From Here to Eternity, which earned her a Golden Globe, she instantly reminded audiences of her luminous, effortless star power. When she agreed to star in Brainstorm alongside Christopher Walken in 1981, it was meant to be the grand opening chapter of an exciting second act in her career, showcasing a mature, intellect-driven side of her craft. Tragically, her life was cut short at age 43 before that second act could fully bloom, leaving behind 56 completed films and a tragic, unfinished final performance. Yet, despite the sensationalized headlines, legal battles, and unanswered questions that have swirled around her final hours off Santa Catalina Island for over 4 decades, Natalie Wood's true legacy endures where it always belonged, on the screen. She remains one of cinema's most enduring icons, a brilliant child star who fought for her autonomy, conquered the silver screen, and left behind an indelible mark on the history of American film. Natalie Wood's life was defined by extraordinary talent, but her final night remains one of Hollywood's darkest and most tragic mysteries. Whether we ever get true legal closure or not, her legacy as a silver screen legend will never fade. What do you think really happened out on the water that night? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe for more classic Hollywood stories.